Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the third panel of the day, which is called Learning and Development. It's great to see so many of you dropping onto the gamification leaderboard as well, and I hope you are enjoying that, and of course the conversations that we are having too. Now, increasing pressures to deliver is common in the public sector. You all know that very well. And you can only deliver if you have a team resourced with the correct skills backing that project. Well, in our next discussion, we're going to look at how learning and development in the public sector has seen radical change since the pandemic started. A powerful tool is being able to harness the power of data, and that helps us better understand who your people are and identify areas to develop the team in line with the organization's goal. This data can then lead you to the best path for improving the organization's learning and development strategies. So, how do we achieve this? Well, to discuss this further, we have with us a great panel, and they are Rachel Kay, who is the Chief Learning Officer for Babington. We also have Naomi Clayton, Deputy Director for Research and Development, Learning and Work Institute. And we have Debbie Crawford, who's the Head of Learning Resources Directorate, Central Bedfordshire Council. So welcome to all of our panel. Nice to have you with us, and nice to have an all-female panel as well. And of course, audience, don't forget, please, that if you do use the Q&A section or the function, then we'll get as many of those questions as we can to our panel during the discussion too. So let's take a real dive in then. And Naomi, a general question. Let's start with you. What are the broader trends in terms of learning and development?
Great, thank you, and great to join the discussion this morning. At Learning and Work Institute, we've been exploring what the kind of broader trends look like in terms of learning and development, and how employer investment in a kind of more general sense has been changing. And I think we see two kind of broad trends that run across the board. One is of less investment going into learning and development in general. So we know that investment in skills and learning development is absolutely critical when it comes to productivity and innovation, but also in terms of individuals' kind of career and earnings progression. But when we look across the economy as a whole, the proportion of employers that are investing in training has been falling, and it's falling prior to the pandemic. And of course, we see some differences across the public and private sectors, but we are seeing a large fall in expenditure in public administration when it comes to learning and development. And costs per trainee are also lower in the public sector. Costs are quite often equated to quality, or raise questions around the quality of training. But of course, that may be a reflection of perhaps some of the economies of scale that the public sector is able to achieve relative to employers in other sectors. I think the other key thing for us is that access to training remains highly unequal. So in general, we know that graduates are 4 times more likely to participate in job-related training. So, have access to learning and development opportunities. They're 4 times more likely to access those opportunities compared to workers with no qualifications. And that is true within the public sector as well. You're still seeing those large inequalities. So I think for us as an organisation, I think there's more we can do to understand some of the trends and drivers within the public sector, but there are concerns in general about these falling levels of investment, which for obvious reasons have fallen further over the course of the pandemic, but also in terms of the inequalities in access to learning and development opportunities.
So two big areas there then, investment and inequality, and at a time when really we need an explosion really of both those things, because we need to cope with the way things have changed. We'll come back to how we deal with some of that in just a moment, because I just want to bring Rachel in at this point. I know Rachel and Naomi painted a little bit of a bleak picture really about where we are at the moment, but I wondered how you identified the future skills that are needed in your future department and your organisation. And bearing in mind what Naomi said, you know, what are some of the ways we can bring that back to where it should be?
Yeah. Okay, so good morning. Oh, sorry, still good morning to everybody. Yes. Just probably take the first part of the question then, in terms of how do you identify those future skills required. You know, skills scanning at organisational, departmental and individual level are, you know, critical skills we'd expect to see in the sort of L&D function, helping guide the business around how you do identify that future skills required in order for organisational growth, in order for projects to be achieved. So certainly some of the things that we work with our clients on is really starting at the very top of the agenda around, you know, looking at the real service objectives or functional objectives for your particular department or the profession in which you're representing, and having a look specifically at what's on the change agenda over the next 2 to 5 years. You know, where is the current skills and capability you have in your organisation? And I'm finding that I know can be tough and not always easy to do, but we certainly suggest starting at that sort of identification of what needs to happen in the function or in the organisation over the next 2 to 5 years to really give you the platform or the starting position to think about how you then drive your skills agenda. Once you've probably come up with that area of identification around where your challenges are, then for us it's looking at how do you define the core competencies that you need your workforce to have, and how do you then break down the skills, the knowledge and the behaviours within those competencies that the function needs in order to reach its objectives. And then the next part for us then is to begin to look at the identification of labour that you've currently got in your organisation and begin to do some mapping around, well, how are they performing against that required future skills standard that you're looking for, and where then do we begin to build sort of, you know, programs, learning academies, looking at particular job functions, or identify areas of perhaps shortfall in competency, and what, you know, development we can put in place in order to close the gap. So, you know, starting at the top, what are the challenges over the next 2 to 5 years? Where are the core skills and competency required? And then doing some analysis and some assessment around current position, where you need to be, and then you've got the gap. That for us is where you begin to create, I guess, a sort of future skills agenda in order for your, you know, your department or your function to work on.
Right. Okay. So I mean, that's quite a forensic way of looking at it, isn't it, really? And also how you deal with it. It's obviously very detailed. In terms of the broader trends that we heard about, the inequality, the lack of investment, I was wondering, and maybe this is something we can put to Debbie, really, how you engage the workforce with learning activity that is actually relevant and appropriate to them.
Because the one thing we found throughout the pandemic is finding ways to engage with learners at all times of day. We've moved to more flexible and agile approaches to learning, which has had a significant impact on that ability to have people sitting in a classroom. So in a physical environment, it's reasonable to say this course is going to be a day. Actually, in reality, if you're undertaking learning online, it's a different experience. You've got to hold that person's attention for a period of time. So we've tended to have to review how we deliver learning, and we've also considered what that learning means in practice and how you can encourage the learner not just to do the knowledge, but actually think about it in their day-to-day work. In terms of responding to the question, it is much more of a challenge because it's far easier for people to potentially not, if they're sitting in front of it, because actually, you know, they might be on their computer doing the learning, but they may also be on their computer working as well. So we've had scenarios where people have sat in a classroom but not really participated. It is a challenge, but actually finding diverse ways to deliver the learning, and then finding ways to back up the learning with further exploration with those people in a different format. So using things like the breakout technology that exists, and bringing them back together and just having the conversations post-training delivery to talk about case studies and how they reflect on that learning. So we've managed to keep engagement going through providing a different range of access and a different approach to how we normally deliver learning. But for us, for everybody, it is a different style of learning. Helping people to understand why they need to do it in the first place is the starting point. And for us, you know, we're driven. Councils are huge communities of learning. We have what we call our common learning, that we say everybody is able to manage that through data. So we use data to inform the compliance. So those that have, those that haven't. And we regularly review evaluations to understand if the learning's still fit for purpose. What becomes more of a challenge is those specifics, that learning that's applicable to one area, but not necessarily to another. Helping people to understand why that learning is really, really important to them is critical, actually, and what's the cost benefit to the organisation, but also to them personally. You know, it's trying to get them to see the what's in it for me and what's in it for my customers, the people that I'm supporting, the people that I'm working with on a daily basis. It's critical, actually, to get them to understand the why as much as you need to. You need to help people to understand the why.
Yeah, and that's perfectly put. And you know, we understand what you're saying there, and certainly how it relates to everybody else, because I think it is a shared experience. Naomi, I was just wondering about the shift to online learning, because we've seen an awful lot of it, and probably will continue to see that. But the role that EdTech can play in supporting learning and development, how do you see that working?
Yeah, absolutely. We have seen a real kind of significant shift to online learning, both within the workplace and more generally. So, you know, every year Learning and Work Institute runs a survey of adult participation in learning, which covers workplace learning and kind of other types of formal and informal learning. And we saw that last year, 60% of adult learners did their learning online. We're also seeing increased level of investment in learning technologies. We tended to see greater levels of investment in the private sector in these types of technologies. But certainly one of the things that we've seen over the course of the pandemic and recent years is that kind of all of the innovation in EdTech. A lot of our work has focused on how the role of kind of EdTech in supporting people who are looking to move into kind of new areas of work and new careers. But I think there's some lessons that are perhaps applicable to those in work anyway, which relate to some of what's already been mentioned around you know, the importance of bite-sized learning, the importance of personalization, the importance of ensuring that people really have a clear idea of why it is they're starting this kind of learning journey and process. And clearly technology has been a great enabler of distance learning through the pandemic. And, you know, there's as I've said, there's been a huge amount of innovation, and, you know, we're seeing the ability of AI powered tools to provide data analytics to support more kind of personalized and kind of tailor-made learning. But clearly, you know, I think probably over you know, something close to 40% of people find it very difficult to learn solely online. there's still clearly a need for kind of peer-to-peer learning and face-to-face learning. And a lot of work that we've been doing recently has been focusing on the role of managers within that as well, which I think is particularly important for kind of new recruits and potentially people with lower levels of qualification too.
Yeah,
Samina, I don't know if I can just come in and support.
Yeah, please do.
Sorry, that Naomi's saying, because obviously at Babington, you know, probably most famous for running modern apprenticeships and you know, working with the public sector in real you know, in real detail around a number of different standards, and just picking up on, you know, Naomi's, what she's talking about in terms of personalization of learning, you know, the mix and the blend of, you know, face-to-face versus, you know, that online digital content. And it is a challenge, certainly in apprenticeships. And I'm sure everybody listening on the call today are thinking, you know, gone of the days where, you know, perhaps an apprentice learned some of their new skills and their crafts by having chats with people when they're getting a coffee or in the lunch queue. And obviously those things are not as easy nowadays. We're certainly seeing a drive, certainly from our customer base, to going back to doing some face-to-face and making sure it really is a true blend. The use of technology, which we're finding particularly impactful, to have almost that sort of offline chat relationship within the apprenticeship groups, are user-generated content. So using applications and technology where you can create your own little, you know, 2-minute sort of, you know, video that then gets sort of shared amongst the group. And it's a great way for networking, you know, sharing learning. And that sharing of learning, I learned how to do this. You know, we talked about this particular subject in our apprenticeship on an online workshop last week. Well, I'm actually going to tell you how I embedded those skills in a workplace environment. And we focused certainly in all our program development from an apprenticeship point of view around the 3 E's. So, you know, learning is about education, exposure and experience. So yes, we need to give people that good education in a blended way, but we need to give them a chance to expose themselves to real life situations to apply the learning. So again, how can you use that using technology? That's perhaps where those user generated conversations come in. And then finally, how do you get that experience? You know, we do need to go and attend activities, a great chance to do face-to-face, for example, and really give them some experience to embed those skills. So I think, you know, technology is an enabler, but it can't be the only solution. And so apprentices, in terms of building skills, we're going to have to give them a load more than just good learning tech.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love the idea of the educational TikTok video as well, which sounds very effective.
They love it. They love it.
And age appropriate, which is even better.
And all age of apprentices, you know, our apprenticeships that, you know, are not all of, you know, between sort of, you know, 16 and 25, you know, because anybody's an apprentice now. So, you know, people are really, you know, benefiting from having that user generated content, which is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Debbie, you mentioned data, and I think it'd be interesting to know what sort of data informs your decisions when you're looking at staff development activities. I mean, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so data for us is very much about, obviously, we're doing our usual workforce planning. And so we're capturing and understanding what the future workforce skill sets are likely to be and what our existing staff skill sets are likely to be. Really important for us to understand those needs and demands on the business for the future, but also as they emerge, you know, being prepared and being ready for them. But alongside that, we use a lot of data that's available to us through national data sets. So because we have statutory services within the council, we're able to draw on that. So we know what's coming down the line and what the expectations are likely to be for us. But from an internal perspective, we undertake regular audits of staff through, you know, discussions, annual discussions, ongoing discussions. We capture learning needs. We have a fairly good platform for people to access learning, and they can make us aware of their learning needs. And we do our annual conversations with managers to capture feedback and get data from that. But just reflecting back to statutory services, we look at this and understand from the case audits what the likely skill gaps are that are emerging. So as much as possible, we use data, but we also ask the questions that need to be asked from people as well. Because, you know, everybody has a responsibility to recognise their responsibilities to do a good job, and what do they consider their gaps and needs. As much as we can say you need this, you need that, actually it's quite embracing to have that annual conversation and ask people where they see their needs and their development, and they're more engaged actually if it's something they identified for themselves, or a manager has worked with the team to identify a team need. They seem to take it on board and want to drive it forward, because they recognise we have to learn this. It's going to make a difference to our customers. And actually, you know, be that customer a person in a care home, or that customer at the end of an experience from our community safety team, it's really critical that we work to ensure that the whole workforce have the ability and the confidence to do a good job. And I think if people recognise that and they understand why the learning needs to happen, and work with us to identify the learning, as much as it's easy to go out and look at what the national picture says, but actually, you know, local authorities can be a little bit different. You know, we're not all the same. So actually understanding our local agenda and our local needs is as much a priority as the national that's telling us. So we have a range of approaches, because actually that's critical. It's not just about, well, you know, government says we need to do this. It's more about what are the needs that we've identified nationally that actually are gaps locally, or what are the gaps locally that actually are not being picked up elsewhere. I think you've got to have a range of intelligence to help you to define what the learning needs to be. But I think critical is people on the ground and understanding what they see as their training need, their development needs, and how you might take that forward. So the data's great, and we do use the data, but it tends to be the starting point, not necessarily the end point. Because I think that's about listening to people as well.
It certainly is, and it is nice as well to hear about the annual performance review, which was something I think a lot of us haven't had for a long time, and it would be nice if it was face to face again as well. Let's take a couple of questions, because we've had two that have come in certainly, and there's one which I can't see all of it because it won't let me scroll down to it. So I'll ask the first one and then get to the second one. But how do you safeguard to ensure that user-generated content remains at the right level of quality and avoids any bad practices or H&S issues? So, Rachel, do you want to say that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, that was, you know, safeguarding is, you know, one of our core principles, and, you know, governance and quality. So the technology that we use allows all of that to be pre-assessed. So we're controlling, and we can have a look about what people are publishing. So it, you know, activates in a real safe environment. So, yeah, really good question. And have some assurance that there is a filtering to make sure that everything's appropriate, and our quality teams are focused on that. And actually, so far, since we've been running some of the programs, we're trialing it in things like accounting level 7 apprenticeships, and also in the new HR people professional level 7 apprenticeships. So we're certainly using it at some of those more sort of senior focused programs with great results, and we haven't had to haven't created or seen any safeguarding issues so far.
Okay, so it's in safe hands, is what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so. Governance and technology, yeah.
Okay, great. We've got another question, maybe one for you, Naomi. I think this one, it says there's a need now, more so, for a blended learning approach, e-learning, virtual and face-to-face learning. L&D professionals need to upskill too. So where should we start? Which is a good question, isn't it? There's a lot to ask, but where do you start?
It's a great question, and I guess we've been thinking about this from in terms of the role of kind of line managers more generally, and absolutely agree there's a need for blended learning. And I think as we kind of roll out new technologies and ways of learning, we need to continue to monitor the impact and the effectiveness of that too, is I think probably the first thing to say. But I guess we've been thinking about, rather than just thinking about L&D professionals, the role of line managers in supporting learning and development. because that's absolutely critical. And I think learning and development for line managers is obviously part of this picture. We did some work with the Chartered Management Institute to run a big survey of managers, senior leaders and employees to really understand the role of line managers in supporting learning and development a bit better. And obviously, I think the role of line managers is absolutely critical when it comes to supporting particularly staff with lower levels of work experience, perhaps lower level qualifications, the type of workers that quite often miss out on training and development opportunities more generally. And I think it's critical to kind of, and this relates to the point about you start with the data and then you need to move on to the conversations and really understanding what types of support people need, and that's a critical role for line managers. And I think the remote working has made that much more difficult, and the role of line managers in supporting learning and development, I think, more difficult. That's something that we found. But I think it's also important to recognise, I think, that support for employees' needs is not always matched with kind of line management support. So some of the things that came across as priorities from an employee's perspective were receiving feedback from their manager on an ongoing basis, and that being a core part of learning and development. So 92% of employees would prioritise that, whereas only 71% of managers prioritised giving feedback when they were thinking about learning and development. So I think there's something about understanding the needs of individual workers and thinking about where the kind of priorities lie. But we've also been kind of thinking about kind of top tips for managers in terms of learning and development as well. But I guess we would come at it from that point of view, thinking about the kind of more general role of managers in learning and development.
That's a staggering figure, isn't it? 92% of us want the feedback, which is amazing, isn't it? And perhaps not, not surprising really, because it is what keeps us going, isn't it? Now, I just want to ask Rachel about the power skills, because it was something that, fascinated us, and we thought, well, how can coaching develop power skills in everyone? And we've not got a lot of time, so whatever you can tell us, Rachel, would be great. Tell us about power skills.
Yeah, sure. I mean, power skills, you would have heard probably historically people talk about soft skills, but, those soft skills that we've referred to are things like communication, leadership, critical thinking, problem solving. There's nothing soft about them. They are very much about power. And certainly at Babington, we've been looking at how, if you have a coaching style of leadership and how you use coaching in your organisation, the skill sets that you use for coaching, things like listening, feedback, questioning, relationship building, can help build some of those power skills, because you've got things like communication is a power skill and you'll use it when you're coaching. So there's a correlation between great power skills and being able to sort of support coaching as a way of leadership, as in addition, to coaching being a more formal activity as well. So probably in a minute, hopefully that will give you a bit of a flavour.
Brilliant. Yep, we are intrigued now. We have just got a minute left, so I just want to ask you, we're talking about learning and development, just a couple of sentences each from you really, and Debbie, about how you're thinking this will develop in the future, your hopes for how you want to see it develop in the future.
I think learning needs to become more intuitive and more tuned into the workforce in terms of what they need to hold your hand, or you need to hold their hand. We need to walk that path together.
Great, thank you. Naomi?
I guess a couple of things. I think as we introduce kind of more kind of blending learning approaches and different approaches, it's kind of learning from that and understanding how effective that is. And then going back to the point that I raised at the start of the discussion about access and the inequalities in access to learning opportunities. That's something that we'd like to see addressed right across the board.
An investment would be great too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll put it all in there. And just finally, Rachel, how you're hoping it will all work out.
Yeah, for me, I've got in my head 3 Ps. Yeah, so learning for me is about personalization, driving potential, and supporting great performance. And, ask all of the listeners on the call today to think about how you can create great personalized learner journeys for your teams. What potential have you got there, and how are you sweating the assets from the skill sets that are currently in the organization, and how do you continue with CPD? And then also, has your skills agenda, has it been agreed, and is it driving performance at functional organizational level? So yeah, remember those 3 Ps: personalization, potential, and performance.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. It's been fascinating talking to you. Naomi, Rachel, and of course, Debbie. Thank you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Well, that was another really engaging conversation. So thank you very much to our panel for that. And it looks like 30 minutes really doesn't seem enough, because once the conversation gets going, we seem to have more and more of your questions, and of course, more avenues to explore. But it is time for a break. And we want to remind you that you could still be scoring points with our gamification tool. And don't forget, there are prizes as well. Well, certainly, we've got some really good charities which we can help through your work. So please help us do that. Now, if you jump into the meeting hub as well, we hope you're building connections with the delegates who are here, not only for this event, but indeed delegates who will sign up for future events as well. As I said, it is time for a break, a well-deserved break. So enjoy lunch, everybody, and we will see you back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.